Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting with a stranger. I know it's not your first foray in that. Um, if you
I
don't
have some
mind,
practice.
yeah, you do. You have some practice. I'd love to know a little bit more about you, so maybe give like a quick summary of who you are and what you've done in the past, and then we can kind of go from there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Hi. My name is Jonathan Metz, and I am an engineer by trade. But probably the reason you wanted to chat with me about this is that I wrote for and edited and helped manage a website called Nintendo World Report for about 15 years. And for about half of that time, I was the host of its sort of flagship podcast, Radio Free Nintendo. So we had a weekly production schedule, and that show is still going now weekly, even now. But when I was doing it, we had to talk about things every week for about 2 hours every week, and so we run through every topic you can imagine that has even a passing relationship to Nintendo, and tried to look at it through that prism, I guess, from that perspective, and argue about things, and had a lot of fun doing it. So. And before that time, even so, I started writing for Nintendo World Report in its original form called Planet GameCube, and even a little bit before that, going back to 2001. So yeah, I was around when Melee first debuted.
That is so cool. And in some of my research and for some of the videos I've made, Nintendo World Report has been an invaluable resource, not just for like the sheer content on there, but the fact that a lot of the original posts from that era, when it was Planet GameCube, it has remained intact, largely untouched, and that's been just a surprisingly fun way to go back and just like kind of go into a time machine. It's fantastic.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's one thing that I love about the website is its longevity and the staff's commitment to maintaining all that archival content, because it is like a snapshot in time. And at this point, it's over a really long stretch of time. The site is this year is 25 years old. And we have 99% of the content, I think, that was ever posted to it is still available, still searchable. It's up there with today's hottest headlines, and the latest game reviews. You can go back and read all of the reviews we wrote for the GameCube launch in 2001, and even some stuff from earlier than that. So yeah, I love that that's available, and that some people find it useful or interesting. I have fun just going back and browsing through that old stuff.
Yeah, if only the other websites you link to were just as committed as you guys, right?
Well, it's frozen that way, and yeah, I do think we're a relic of the old internet, and like sort of a living tribute to that whole legacy. And yet they're still posting new stuff every day, reviews, videos, podcasts, all kinds of articles all the time. And that's so exciting. And I love to, now I've been retired from the site for almost a decade, and I love that it's still going on. It's developing its own personality. It's becoming a new thing for a new generation of people, and made by a new generation of all volunteers. And it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, you certainly have a lot to be proud of. Not many people can say they started something in the digital world as long as 2 decades ago and have it still be running. So that is definitely something to be proud of.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I didn't start the site, but I started some of the things that, that are still going today, or the things that persisted over a long period of time. I just love to see it change and adapt, as the generations of video games continue forward, and everything in our world comes and goes. And I love that the site can persist through that and adjust to it, and, stick around. It's really
Yeah.
awesome. It's a living, organic thing.
Do you prefer Johnny or John or Jonathan?
Most people online call me Johnny, and most people in person call me Jonathan. So either one
Okay.
is totally fine.
I'll stay in my correct lane and call you Johnny. Happy to do that. Um,
All right.
so, if speaking on that topic, if you were to maybe pick one or two or however many people that you would consider like the founder of, Planet GameCube or whatever it was before that. Do you have any names that come to mind?
Sure. Yeah, Billy Berghammer started the site. And then sort of very quickly the site merged with a couple of other popular fan sites. We used to call them. I don't think that term is used much today, but it merged with the 64 Source, which Justin Nation founded, and two or three of the staff members at that time joined with Billy's group, and some of them are still around today. Amazing. This was like back in 99, 2000 timeframe. Some of this is before I joined the staff. So Justin Nation, I would consider kind of a co-founder, and Max Lake, Rob Stevens, Rick Powers, AKA, and Mike Krusecki. I think those guys were all very early, and a lot of them brought their own projects and sort of merged them into what Billy had going. So I'd say they were all the co-founders.
Cool. One thing that I found, I listened to that. I think it was a 2011 podcast where you sort of dug up the 4 audio files from when you'd gone to E3 in 2001, and you were sort of, recording from your potato mic, and it was just wonderful because you knew it was from the era. And one of the things that really, really touched me was one of your points at the end where you kind of explained, you went from having these, friendships you knew online to being in person. And, that was like almost seeing an old friend again. And you're kind of talking about that. And then you said how disappointing it was to go back to your normal life and not being able to be with people that kind of shared your enthusiasm for certain things. And that still really resonated with some of my experiences meeting people online. And so I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on, what was it like in the early days? How did you get involved early on? And then how did your relationships with these people grow when you got to meet them once in a while?
Oh, yeah. I think if I could progress my way of thinking from that snapshot in time, back in 2000, 2001, when I was meeting internet friends for the first time and had never really had that experience. Of course, I would go on to have that experience many, 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 many times in the future. And I think the perspective I gained over time is that, first off, that desire to continue the enthusiastic feeling of doing this stuff with people who are close to you, people who have very aligned interests with you, people who have a similar level of passion and attention to detail maybe that you do, and an interest in speed and doing it the best and getting the cool, catching the details that others might miss, and sorting out the facts from the rumors, and figuring out the right questions to ask people who might actually know the answers to them. That feeling was really exciting for me, and almost, it's very coupled with my love of video games and for Nintendo, but almost separate from that. And I started to realize, okay, this is maybe, I didn't really like team sports when I was growing up. I kind of had some other athletic interests as I got older, but never really been into team athletics per se. But I started to understand, what a lot of people get out of that experience, which is, just being on a team united with a common goal, having a little bit of competition to motivate you, but also maybe just competition with yourselves, just wanting to do your best, to do better than you did last time, and feeling driven by that, and knowing also that there's an immediacy to it. Like at an event like E3, everything is urgent. Everything's happening now, and the first person to get that coverage up wins the day. And they have a huge advantage in traffic and in notoriety and access that may follow from that. So there is a competitive feeling to it, and also a sense that the other people you're with are counting on you to do it right, to do it soon, to do what you said you were going to do. And those things, you don't even have to say any of that out loud with each other. Like, it just kind of becomes very apparent very quickly that that's what everybody needs to do, and that's what everybody's excited about, and that's what we're all going to do. And it just gels when you have the right people, and fun, exciting things are popping off all around you, and everybody is kind of committed to making it work and getting it done and kind of, having fun doing it, that's an awesome feeling. So that motivated me to want to stay in touch with those people all year round, which at the time meant throwing myself deep into the website and spending more and more time doing that. Sometimes at the expense of, what I should have been doing at school. But generally, I managed to balance those things really well and was very successful in both aspects of my life, maybe to the detriment of other aspects beyond those two. But, but yeah, that really made me want to stay connected with these people and to continue living that dream and getting that rush of making something together that people want, that people care about, and something that we could be proud of. And I wanted to do that every day, every week. And I kept doing that for 15 years.
That's amazing. I strongly relate to the idea of, maintaining certain aspects of your life to the detriment of others. Opportunity cost is a tough economics pill to swallow, but it's very real. And I think it's fair to say that, as you get older and you mature and you gain new responsibilities and priorities and things in your life, you have to start making even more difficult decisions. You know the phrase, killing your darlings, right? You have to figure out what things do you really like that you have to get rid of for the sake of something else. And that's something that when you kind of come of age, you have to do that more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really tough to balance, hobbies like video games or working on websites and making podcasts. Very hard to balance those things with family, with work, with your health, sometimes with sleep. And there were times in my life when I could afford to have those priorities be way out of balance. And as I get older, I definitely have to reevaluate all of them and figure out something new, figure out what works now, and,
Right.
and understand that may change again.
Yeah, well said. So I'd love to figure out a bit. So we got kind of your some of your early impressions, but I love whatever you can recollect. So how on earth were you able to get to E3? And can you tell a story a little bit about how maybe you got more involved in Planet GameCube early on and how you were able to get to E3? I'd love to hear about that.
Oh, sure. I could that could turn into a very long conversation, but I'll try to summarize it. My first E3 was in 2000, May of 2000, and it was effectively my senior trip from high school. So my other friends in high school, a lot of them went to Jamaica with a big group of people and got up to a bunch of nonsense down there. And a lot of them went to Cancun, I think. And going to another country would have been super cool. It would turn out to be a couple more years before I got to do that. So a little bit of FOMO with that. But I thought I could go down there and do some underage drinking and, and go to the beach. But I would much rather go to E3. I was 18. Of course, E3, the idea that even maybe I could get into it, I thought I have to try. So, of course, I had the internet. I was writing my own website, basically today what you'd probably consider a blog. Like just a one-person amateur thing. Here are some reviews of video games on Nintendo 64. Here's a list of all the N64 games that support the expansion pack for added memory. And, here's a bunch of silliness. Here's a chat room and a message board with a handful of people who like to hang out here and a lot of inside jokes among ourselves. So it went from that, but that was enough for me to go to the E3 website and figure out how to register I think I tried to register as media, and I didn't meet some of the credentials. Like I didn't have a business card, I didn't have like a legal address. I didn't have like an incorporated business name with like a business address. And so I was really down crest about this. And then crestfallen. Anyway, I was really upset about it. And then I just kept poking through it, and I found there was some way to register for exhibits only. And I want to say it was free, oddly enough, back in 2000. I think there was an exhibits only pass. You still had to prove that you were somehow a member of the industry, but the badge itself was free, because at that time, the idea was that if you were paying to go for access to E3, you were paying for the panel programming that they did where they brought in, executives and people like that, creatives to talk about various topics of relevance to industry people, or you were a vendor, or you were an exhibitor, somebody with something to show and you were buying space on the floor to do it, or you were registered media. There were only like a handful of categories, but then like there was this huge swath of people attending E3 with exhibits only passes. And it turned out a lot of other people had kind of figured out what I had figured out, which is that it's not that difficult to prove that you have some affiliation to the industry. For a lot of people, it's like they worked at a local GameStop and that was enough. And it's like, yeah, I'm a member of the industry. So you can get an exhibits only pass. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it was free. Maybe later they charged $100 for it or something, but whatever. And you too could go to E3, and that's how you get to 50, 60, 70,000 people some of those years at E3, because a lot of the people showing up there were not really professionals in the industry, but they had some interest in being there, and the threshold was really low. And then they just straight up started selling passes to the public. For a long time, it was sort of kind of open to the public. You just kind of had to know how to finagle the forms and show something that said you could get in. Even register as media turned out to be easier over time, I think. But yeah, eventually they started selling passes, and I don't think it worked out that well for them by that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went to the show on my own with a friend from high school who was just like a buddy. He had an interest in games. He wanted to go check out a bunch of PC games, and so we got a hotel room and we showed up at E3 every day, and it was awesome. And I met tons of people who I still know today. And one of the people I met at a party I got invited to, like an IGN party at the Ritz-Carlton, I met a whole bunch of developers and other people in the press, and I met Billy Berkhammer. And he told me that he had a site and he was kind of looking to recruit some writers and editors, and he wanted to know if I'd be interested. And I said, well, I kind of am doing my own thing, but think about it. And a few months later, I started college and was thinking I needed to spend less time on the website, and that it might be good to be a part of a team so that I didn't have to do everything myself. So I joined a team. I joined Billy's site. I handed my own personal site over to another friend, and he kept it going for a while. And of course, I ended up spending far more time on Billy's site than I had ever spent on my own before that. So the plan backfired completely. Yeah. But I did so because I had even much more fun working with the staff at Planet GameCube than I did on my own.
And that kind of goes back to that feeling of the competitive sports or the collaboration aspect of team sports, where you're like, wow, this is not all of a sudden I went from a sole contributor to part of a team, and that is pretty motivating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, well, that paints a great picture for how you got involved in E3 2000. I bet you people were scratching their heads at your choice at the time for your senior trip, but now I think it's pretty obvious that at least to many in my circle, you made the right choice, and that's a great origin story. How did you end up being chosen to go to E3 2001, or was it another process where you kind of signed up again?
For 2001, Billy had more or less gone on his own in the year 2000. Maybe there was one or two other people from the site there that I didn't meet at the time. But I know that in 2001, we took an enormous team of people. Billy was very autocratic about certain decision making and certain things, policies of the website. But in a lot of aspects, he was extremely democratic in the sense that, hey, the cool opportunities that come with working for this site, we're going to try to make sure that every single person involved with the site gets to do it. And that extended to E3. That extended to import games and getting in review copies and and sending out swag and all kinds of other ways. We tried to spread everything as much as we could to everybody, anybody doing anything for the site, because everybody volunteered. So we tried to make sure everybody felt like they were included and got some kind of benefit for all the work they were doing. And for E3, it was like, hey, if you want to come, sign up. We'll make it work. And at the time, part of what helped was that we were extremely popular. The site had an enormous traffic profile for the time, for the conditions. It was seriously, it was competitive with sites like IGN and GameSpot. Probably trailing far behind those sites, but like it was in the tier. It was kind of in the conversation with sites like that. And that certainly was not true within a few years later, so I don't want to make it out like the site's always been this juggernaut, but this was a very particular moment in time back in 2001 where we had a site called Planet GameCube that had been called that since the day the GameCube's name was announced.
Oh.
And it was already an established site from before that. So we had updated Planet in 2000 to become Planet GameCube, and Planet GameCube was one of the biggest sites for GameCube information several months, maybe even more than a year before the GameCube actually came out. So in the E3 2001, Planet GameCube was in its prime. It was still a fairly new site, but it was more mature than a lot of our competitors, and we had a very passionate audience, and we were putting up very hot updates literally 7 days a week all year round. So it was a very vibrant community, and we had a lot of access at an event like E3 where the GameCube was being shown for the first time, really. So it was a big time. We were allowed to bring, I think we had almost 30 people registered with the site in some fashion. And some people didn't come for the entire thing. Some people had precious little affiliation, like they were someone's brother or someone's friend, and they really had
nepotism.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of, hey, I know a guy who can write and he loves Nintendo. Do you think he could do something for the site? And it's like, well, yeah, that's how most of us got involved with it. So sure, why not? Let's see what he's got. He's a good writer. Okay, can he do 3 or 4 articles? And then it comes around time for E3. Hey, he can travel. We're all paying for ourselves to be there completely, right? So can you take the time off of work or off of school? Can you buy your own airplane tickets? Can you chip in for this hotel, this cheap hotel that we're splitting 10 ways? Can you buy all your food? And it's like, yeah, I could scrape it together. Let's do it. And even finding someone who could do all of that and who could write and who was willing to be part of the team, that's a pretty good set of qualifications back in 2001 to come and if you knew what you were talking about, if you could be trusted with a password or, to show up and speak to somebody who matters, then you could probably be on the team. And so it was a pretty wide net back in those days. It's a lot of great people, a lot of awesome people who were excited to get out there and just break news and be the first person to write about certain games in the world, or the first person to write about a game in English, or the first person to play a game on this platform, to see how it compares. One of the first people to hold these controllers. It was really exciting. 2001 is one of the all-time greatest E3s ever, and I went to 16 or 17 of them, and 2001 is easily the top 3, just because the atmosphere around that platform launching later in the year. And the Xbox was there too. It was also pre-launch for Xbox, and the PS2 was a little sleepy out of the gate, but was really hot, So this was just and the GBA actually was coming out a month after E3. So the entire launch lineup for the GBA was there at that show. And that was the first time anybody almost anyone in America had played a GBA, was that E3. So it was a wild time.
That sounds electrifying.
Yeah,
I'd love to know.
Intense.
Yeah, no kidding. I'd love to hear a bit about you talk a little bit about your experience there, and kind of you're in that waiting room and you only got to eat these really good cookies, but you had no other food that first day or whatever. I'd love to learn whatever you can remember from that initial day, because from what I remember, it was all presentations, the actual classic E3 of just speaking. What do you remember from that day, and what do you remember about Nintendo and Smash Brothers Melee?
Are you asking about sort of the day zero of press conferences? Yeah. Gosh, it's funny when I think back to specifically when I think back to Smash Brothers, although maybe this is true for most of those games, I remember the next day a lot better. The official day one of E3 was the day we got to play the games. And I guess my sense memory of actually controlling a GameCube for the first time, and controlling those games for the first time, that really starts on that day. But if I go back to day zero with the press conference, gosh, we were really stoked about all the games they announced. As I recall, a lot of them, including Smash Brothers, a lot of them really, we didn't get much information on them the day of the press conference. They were shown in a trailer or they were shown in a montage, and there was no one necessarily on stage introducing this game, telling you the features, telling you when it's coming out, telling you who's making it. That, in a lot of cases, even for really big games, Nintendo would just sort of show a 15-second video, and then the rest of it is, well, you're going to have to play it for yourself because it's on the floor. And so that's kind of my memory of Smash Brothers, is like, I don't think we broke down the footage second by second and poured over every detail and tried to figure out, what are all these new items and what are these different levels? How are they going to play? We didn't have time to go into that level of detail on every trailer. I mean, it was a big deal for us just to get like the B-roll, to get the B-roll on a VHS versus a beta back then. You had to like ask specifically for a VHS. This is before DVDs, like in 2001. Most people didn't have a DVD player. So we would get the B-roll from the press conference, and that's a lot of additional footage that wasn't actually shown at the event. Like, this is stuff you can splice into a news broadcast where you're trying to show some of the hottest games that appeared at this week's E3. But for us, it's just a treasure trove of extended, uncut video clips from all these games. But this was before video distribution online. So to have this tape and be able to watch all this additional footage of the games that had been announced just a couple hours earlier at the press conference. And most people, even people who attended the press conference, had only seen a few seconds of video. So to have the B-roll and to get to put that in your hotel TV and have a hotel room of 20 people packed in trying to watch it, that is thrilling. That is really exciting stuff. And we're not having like a structured conversation and picking apart what we're looking at. It's more like, it's just like people shouting and cheering and arguing the entire time, and a lot of, shh, 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 they're showing Zelda now or whatever. They probably weren't showing Zelda that year. No, not in 2001. But anyway, it was just really exciting. And then it was like, hey, we've been writing all day. We've been trying to get these news stories out. We're gonna get food delivered to the hotel to make sure everybody eats something for dinner, because it's very easy to skip meals when you're working as hard as we were. And then, hey, let's everybody, please, I know you want to stay up and talk with your friends and chat online and think about and dream about all the things that we're going to do tomorrow, but actually you got to sleep. You really, really, really need to get sleep, because tomorrow is another 20-hour day. So it just felt like the next day came so fast, like you weren't even ready for it before it's time to get up and go out there and actually play all these things.
Yeah, that was an amazing recap. I mean, I'm getting excited just hearing you talk about it. It just I can't imagine going, rushing to a hotel room with legs that I'm sure were sore and everyone was tired, but there was probably so much excitement and just like whooping and hollering at the sheer spectacle that was the B-roll in the hotel room. That sounds so cool.
Critically, David, I was a teenager. So, my body couldn't really take all of this, but it managed to soldier on anyway. And now if I did this, I'd have to go see a doctor like before I could be cleared to go back to the show the next day.
Oh my goodness. And of course everyone's sharing a hotel room, and like that's just insane. But it's what you did to get a good deal. So that was day zero. I'd love to know a bit more about day one. What was like, I remember from your recording you talk about how, you were the first in line, but it didn't matter because other folks from other booths were already playing the game before you were able to.
Yeah, that's a funny detail. And it's always true. Like outside the exhibit hall doors of E3, there is always a big pile up in the hour or maybe 2 hours before the doors open, especially on the first day. A lot of people pile up. They want to be one of the first in there to go try to get into do whatever it is they think. So it's weird because a lot of times you don't really know what's inside. So it's hard to know what to prioritize. Where do you try to go beat the crowd? Where do you try to go get that demo that is going to have a 6 hour line by noon? It's very difficult to know that, especially on day one. But for us, of course, we're going straight for Nintendo. So yeah, we lined up, and when the security people finally scanned our badges and let us through the door, we're practically running over to the Nintendo booth over on the right side of West Hall in the LACC. And we get over there, and it's very defeating to know that you really did beat that huge crowd behind you. You made it there first, but now you have to wait 5 minutes to play this game because there are already people playing it because they had special access. So, it's a very deflating moment, very funny in retrospect. But I believe the first game I went to was Smash Brothers because it was probably the nearest to my entry point into the booth. And I gotta say, I was really curious to play Melee because we had seen the footage from the day before, and especially when you looked at the B-roll, you started to get a sense of the increased scope of that game and the variety of art styles that they were pulling off on the GameCube that you really couldn't try to do on the N64 in the same way. And you get a sense of just how many items they've added, how many characters and levels they've added, how much more complicated all these combinations could become in a game like that when you build on it from what they started on N64. So I was very fascinated by the idea of a sequel to that game and what they were doing with it. And, my first thoughts as I approached that demo kiosk were that the game looked absolutely incredible. The graphics on Melee were so surprising to me. I think there were 15 or 20 playable GameCube titles that E3 over Nintendo's booth. I mean, they had a pretty decent launch lineup, I think, and a lot of post-launch stuff. And Melee, I wouldn't have guessed from that N64 game. I would not have guessed Melee to end up being a graphical showcase on the next system. But they pulled off something with the image quality on that game, and I think it's the texture detail. I remember one of the first memories I have of seeing Melee up close at that demo was that someone had paused the game and was spinning the camera around and zooming in on Mario's overalls, and you could see the stitching in his overalls and the buttons on it. And I remember thinking, that is such a weird detail to include, a weird level of detail to have in a game where the camera is zoomed out and you're trying to look at the whole stage at once, and his character is going to be really small over there in the corner of the screen. And I didn't understand at the time how much this sort of photo mode where you could pause the game and pan around, how important that would become, and how much the presentation of Smash Brothers would revolve around views and perspectives on the action that aren't really possible while you're playing the game. And I guess I'm referring to all the reveal trailers that they do for characters, and all the cutscenes in Subspace Emissary later on for the Wii, and a lot of other modes, where the game and the presentation of that game and the way it's marketed to people and the way that these games are announced and explained, it's all about the camera moving and revolving around the characters in space, even as they're, in motion, not necessarily paused. But so much of the game is sort of viewed from a perspective that you don't really see it when you're playing it. And that always rubs me funny, I guess. But anyway, it's kind of a weird tangent because I really did feel that Melee looked crisper than the other GameCube titles there. It ran smoother. It ran faster. The whole game just plays faster than something like Luigi's Mansion, so it's immediately more exciting. And the variety of characters was already at that time better than what we'd seen in the previous game. And of course there were tons of secret ones that would have to wait to be broken on Planet GameCube several months later, a couple weeks before the game launched, and pissing off a lot of fans around the world and Nintendo. Yeah.
That's the business of journalists, though, isn't it?
Yes. I've never at all felt apologetic for stuff like that. I mean, it's like you can't really accuse someone of spoiling when part of their task is to spoil information about games that aren't out yet. Like almost anything you could possibly say about a game that hasn't been released is a spoiler, right? So I thought it was really strange that people got on our case about leaking Smash Brothers characters before the game came out, because I do appreciate that discovering those characters and unlocking them is part of the joy. But I thought it was really weird that people felt that even revealing who the character would be was something that was like sacred and should not be discussed before the game came out. And I thought, this is a fighting game. I'm not telling you that one character is going to betray another and kill him off, in some shocking twist of a narrative adventure. It's like, no, these are characters fighting each other for arbitrary reasons. Like, why would you care about a secret? And I guess my thoughts on that have changed a little bit over time as I get older. But yeah, I still think it's just really weird to go to a site like that and be upset when they know things and they tell you things about a game that's not out yet. It's like, that's why most people are here,
Right.
And it's weird that you would be okay with us doing that for all these other games, but not this particular one.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one thing that sites have gotten a bit more mature about are like spoiler options built in, like Reddit, where you can spoiler posts as they go up. But you're totally right. I mean, that's it is hard to decide. This website's all about the most cutting edge information we have, and and also, well, we can't spoil things for people. It's like those two goals can't coexist.
Yeah, like I mean, I can't speak for other people on the staff. I personally used to go into E3 and similar events, even like press events at Nintendo headquarters. I went to a couple of those. And I would sort of go in with the attitude of, I'm going to try to find out some information here that they don't want me to know. and ideally, it's something that I can eventually tell my audience before they would have known otherwise, because they want to know the things I want to know. And I want to know the things that Nintendo doesn't want me to know. Like, what's your next game? How's it going to play? Who's going to be in it? And I understand these are entertainment products, and it's probably a healthier way to live, to just say, I'm just going to wait till it comes out and then I'll be delighted by whatever it turns out to be. And that's the way Nintendo would definitely like to have you feel. It's just like, well, I don't know anything about it, but it's Nintendo, so I guess I'm going to go buy it.
Right.
And it's just like, it's so antithetical to what we were doing with our website. It's like, no, we want people to be informed. We want you to be able to make critical decisions about how you spend your money and which games are worth your time and what kinds of games might interest you, even though you haven't heard of them before. And what's the difference between this game if you play it on your Nintendo system versus if you had played it on your PlayStation? For some people, that's a decision that they need to make. And who's going to tell you if not us? Who's going to review the GameCube version of Tony Hawk if not us? So
it must
anyway,
be done.
These are just yeah.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
So back to your original experience of, the person, you had to wait 5 minutes, even though you were first in line, but then you got to play it, and you said the graphics really stuck out to you, the art design. Can you describe, like, do you remember anything about the booth itself, or how it felt to pick up a GameCube controller for the first time, or any of the things like that?
Yeah, the booth at that year, and I can't remember a lot of E3 Nintendo booths at E3 because there were so many, and some of them mushed together. But the one that year, I remember pretty clearly that it had sort of a central area with a lot of TVs set side by side. And that's pretty typical, just rows of kiosks to fit in as many people as you could. But there was an outer ring sort of near the outer boundary of Nintendo's booth that year where they had theater rooms that were cloaked in, I mean, they're not true rooms, they're not truly structural, but they were basically booths sort of like the size of a small room, and they had them cloaked in big black cloth to shut out everything from outside. And for that reason, it wasn't really clear that they were there or what they were, or that there were games inside, because you couldn't really hear them and you couldn't see what was happening inside. But I happened to notice someone coming in or out of one, and I thought, hey, what's that? And so I slipped in there, and it's sort of like a private game demo within Nintendo's much larger booth at the show. And I think it's one of those where I played Smash for the first time. And so even though it's a big, loud event, tens of thousands of people milling about, and a lot of them concentrated literally in the area where we were, over by the Nintendo and right next to it, the Sony booth. But in this little pocket of quiet, relative quiet and darkness, you could really focus on the game, and you could have a quieter conversation with someone doing the demo for you. So I think that was the setting in which I played the game for the first time. And my feeling on it was, wow, I can't believe I'm finally holding this controller. I don't know what to do with these buttons, or why is the shoulder button analog when it just brings up a shield for my character? I don't know what's analog about that. I mean, there were a lot of really basic things to figure out that it's a little hard to appreciate now looking back on it. But yeah, I remember thinking that Melee felt so much faster than the original game. And the characters sort of felt like they jumped higher, and they fell faster, and they dashed around more. And oh wow, there's a whole extra special move for every character. So there's just going to be a lot more to remember and to figure out how do I build my tactics around all this. And yeah, those were the kind of thoughts that I would have been dealing with.
Cool. Yeah, because I assume you were just you were a fan of Smash 64, and so I'm sure you had your muscle memory, you had your opinions on gameplay. So it probably was just so fun to see like the new coat of paint and then all these new features and the new feeling.
Yeah, I would have played the N64 game about 2 years earlier when it came out in the States, and had, a couple times since then. But I never owned it. I rented that game a couple times. So I had played it, but not extensively, probably not very much 3 or 4 player at that point. And, I liked it. I loved how original it was. And I love the idea of mixing up all these Nintendo characters. It just seems so blasphemous. It seems so unlike Nintendo to mix up all their characters and have them beat up on each other. So that was very novel about that first game, but it didn't stick with me a whole lot. And with Melee, it felt like, okay, they've really cranked it up here. They're really doing something with this idea. And that game, obviously it took the franchise to a very different stratosphere than the first game could have.
No kidding. I like what you said earlier about how the game had an oddly intense attention to detail. And I think one thing that exemplifies that perfectly are trophies, because that's the whole point of trophies is like
Yeah.
zoom in, look at the details, create these intricate models for things that aren't even going to be playable in the game. They're not they're just like these collectibles. And so I think what you said earlier is 100% on the money about that. And I think trophies and the camera mode exemplify that.
Yeah, and things like trophies and the huge array of modes and optional features and settings and all the things that make Melee the sort of infinite party engine, that I really associate with that game now. I didn't know about any of that back at E3 2001. They hadn't shown any of that stuff. So there were probably 4 or 6 characters maybe in that demo. Mario, Bowser, Kirby, I'm sure was there. I don't remember all of them, but it was just very contained, and it was more about the fighting. It was just more about the feel. It was trying to, again, wrestle with that controller, which just didn't seem super well suited to a fighting game, even to a Smash type game at that time. And I'm not sure I ever got over that feeling, but obviously a lot of other people can't play Smash without it or wouldn't want to. But I remember thinking it was a little bit of an awkward fit, whereas Luigi's Mansion felt more natural for the GameCube controller. And of course, Mario Sunshine later on, that did too. So Yeah. But yeah, my first my first impression of Melee was just, gosh, this came out of nowhere. The first game wasn't even that old, and it seemed already they had far surpassed what they were trying to do with the N64 game. And that was evident even from the demo. I still think it's one of the greatest E3 demos I ever played, because it really did, it captured the fun of that game and the odd feel of that game, and the sort of, again, like the a very impressive presentation and attention to detail. All of that's captured in that E3 demo, which ended up being just a very small slice of the total content. But the way I feel about Smash now, the things I like about it, I recognized from the very first time I picked up the controller and played it, and that's a good demo. That is hard to do.
Yeah. And by the way, uh, anyone listening or you, if you have a copy of this demo, please contact me. Please contact
Yeah,
me.
it
Um,
would have been definitely distinct from the one they took around public at the Cube Clubs, because that was probably September, October of that year. And I remember that being a much bigger demo where they had Zelda and Sheik, and Samus was in that demo. A lot of characters had been added. So the E3 demo was really much more limited. And I think that was the first time it was playable. Yeah.
yeah, and just from what I happen to know, there are different properties. Like there's different. I think there's different hit stun timings. There's different animations. Some of the stages aren't finished. There's beta content galore in that demo disc, and by the time they had the demo that was like more public, that was already based on the 1.0 version. So it was just there's nothing really novel in the like like the multi demo discs they had or whatever. There's nothing
Sure.
special or novel, unfortunately, about those, other than like a few unique screens, like coming soon or whatever, like a texture or two. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the same as 1.0. I'm really interested. What was what was the crowd like? What was everyone around you like in that environment that you can remember?
Oh my gosh, I don't remember the crowd a whole lot. I mean, it is such an ocean of humanity when you're at those E3s. It's you can't. I always had the feeling like you can't really look at someone's face for too long because there are too many faces. You know what I mean? Like, my brain wants to try to remember what people look like and what they're wearing and what's the name on their name tag and all this stuff. And there are too many people there for you to possibly remember or even process it all. And so it's kind of like when you live in a big city, at some point when you have to get used to the crowds, and you just sort of have to learn to navigate through them to where you're going and try to respect other people on the way. But like, I'm not really paying that much attention to the people around me because it's overwhelming. And the sound, gosh, in those days. Now, Nintendo's booth was one of the best places to be for sound. But if you walked to the other side of that room, or if you went over to South Hall with all the third party publishers, it was deafening. It was louder than a rock concert in there.
What?
It was like several rock concerts happening at the same time, and they're trying to drown each other out. Because the convention wasn't enforcing any kind of rules about volume, about flashing lights back in those days. I mean, a lot of it was competitive spectacle. 2001 was probably around the time that Activision had an entire skating half pipe built up in their booth, and they had Tony Hawk and other people dropping from cranes at the ceiling of the building down into the pipe,
Oh
and doing
my
tricks there
gosh.
with like Konami and EA's booths and Ubisoft blasting all kinds of crazy stuff around them while all this is going on. And that was an environment that most people couldn't really stand to be in for very long. Like, you had to go in there and do your business and then go somewhere else. It's just too much.
Oh my gosh. That sounds like an overstimulated nightmare.
Yeah. So, I mean, I say all that so that you understand that when Nintendo provides all their hottest demos in private theater booths where you can go inside and sort of close a curtain behind you, it's miraculous. Like that is a place you want to be. You want to stay there. You want E3 to be only that once you've experienced it.
Oh my gosh, that provides a lot of really good insight. I think there's probably so much more to say, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. I guess looking back, what's your most vivid memory of, maybe something specific about Melee, and then just more broadly at E3 2001 that really sticks with you to this day?
You know, my memories of the show at large are really complicated because it was the first time I met so many people, the first time I did so many things. It was it really like a just so big you had to live it to appreciate it. I mean, it really an incredible moment in my life, and some really cherished memories from E3 2001. About the game in particular, I guess, like all those super detailed thoughts that I had about playing Smash that year are written down and still online, or maybe even I spoke them into a microphone at some point. But I guess looking back now, the thing that I kind of take away was that Smash Brothers went from being a game that I honestly definitely did not expect that it would get a sequel. I didn't know really what I would want in a sequel to Smash other than like very obvious stuff like, yeah, just put in more characters, but like nothing. I couldn't have imagined the kind of overhaul and expansion that they did for it. It was striking. It's kind of like if you went from Brawl to Ultimate, directly to Ultimate. It's just like, whoa, what happened? How did we get here? Melee just felt like, wow, this is the premier launch title. Presumably at that time it was presumed to be a launch title. Turned out to be not quite, but it's like, where did this come from? Like it was pretty much a consensus game of the show for Nintendo at E3, and it's a game that we didn't know existed a day before the show. We didn't know that game existed, and all of a sudden it feels like the highlight of their E3 showcase, and turned out to be one of the biggest selling games of the system and of that whole generation. And really the true start, I think, of a massive franchise that's still going today. Or I guess it's not currently going, but it feels like Smash isn't over. So, yeah, it was wild to go home from E3 obsessing over Smash and replaying the Smash demo in my head. That's not something I would have predicted.
That's so cool. Also, other last question. What happened to your southern accent?
I moved around the country. I lived with people from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, and it just melted away over time. And it comes back a lot when I'm around family, or when I go back to Alabama. Definitely, it comes out. And all I can tell you is I'm not in charge of it.
Yeah, we just need some kind of evidence that you and the person from 23 years ago we hear at an E3 account are the same person. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, it's the same person plus a whole lot of living.
We'll take your word for it. Johnny, thank you so much for chatting with me, and it was just really fun to hear you talk about that. Anything like that you have when it comes to like your audio impressions, your article? I think I've seen those, but if you don't mind just sending me what you have so that I have it, I'd really appreciate it if you're able.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah. All right, Johnny, take it easy.
Yeah, you too.